You stand at the counter with a butcher's bundle open in front of you, the paper still cold from the drive home, and you begin to tidy up the cuts the way you always have. You peel away the pale trimmings along the edges, that gray rind of fat gone the color of dishwater, soft and slick under your thumb, and you drop it into the scrap bucket with a wet little slap. It smells of nothing much. It looks like nothing much. So out it goes, handful after handful, and you wipe your fingers on your apron and think no more of it. And all winter long, when your skillet needs greasing and your pie crust needs shortening, you walk to the store and you pay. You pay $2.84 on the low end. You pay $7.75 on the high end for a tub of the very same fat you carried out to the slop pail in October. You bought back what you already had. You paid store price all winter for the cooking fat you threw away. Here's the part that aches once you see it. The better outcome was sitting in your own two hands the whole time. A whole year of clean white cooking fat, fat for frying and baking and sealing and greasing, and it would have cost you nothing at all but an afternoon of patient low heat and a heavy pot on the back of the stove. Not $1, not a trip to town, just an afternoon, and instead you carried it out the door and tipped it into the pail for the hogs, and then you spent the cold months buying it back one tub at a time. The thing you needed and the thing you discarded were the same thing. Nobody told you they were the same thing. So let me set your mind at ease before we go one step further, because this is not your failing. Nobody ever stood beside you at that counter and showed you. Nobody put a hand on your shoulder and said, that is not waste you are holding. That is a whole season of lard. The modern butcher throws the fat out or sells it back to you cheap because his customers quit asking for it a long time ago. The back fat, the leaf fat from around the kidneys, the firm fat back along the spine. All of it goes in his bin or into a tub with a price sticker because nobody wants it anymore. And when nobody wants a thing, nobody teaches it. So of course you did not know. How could you have known? The knowing simply was not handed down to you the way it was handed down to me. Now let me tell you what I watched this past February, because it has stayed with me. I was visiting a young mother, newly keeping her own house, a good girl with willing hands. She had trimmings in a bowl on her table, a good double handful of clean pale fat, and she carried that bowl to the back door and set it down on the step for the dog. And not 2 feet away, on her own stove, a kettle of that exact same fat was rendering down slow and quiet, turning clear and gold and white before her eyes. She had it in one hand and threw it out the other, and she never saw that they were one and the same. I did not scold her. I only felt that quiet ache you feel watching good fat walk right out the door, watching a thing of real worth handed to the dog because no older woman had ever leaned in close and said, "Child, keep that." And that is the whole trouble, and it is a small trouble once you understand it, because rendering is not some mystery. It is not a chemical cure. There's nothing to get wrong, no acid to measure, no danger hiding in it. Rendering is only 2 plain things, heat and separation. You warm the fat low and slow until it melts away from the bits of meat and skin, and you strain those bits out, and what is left is pure, clean cooking fat that will keep. That is all. Anyone with a heavy pot and a patient afternoon can do it, in a plain kitchen, with no special machine and no fuss at all. Your grandmother did it. Her grandmother did it. And it has been waiting for you this whole time. So before another butchering season passes you by, let me tell you who is talking to you and why I have known this fat since I was a girl. So before another butchering season passes you by, let me tell you who is talking to you and why I have known this fat since I was a girl. My name is Sadie, and I've stood at the butchering table every November since I was 9 years old. The men take the kill and the heavy work, the lifting and the scalding and the hard, cold labor a woman is not asked to do. The frolic itself runs 2 and 3 days, and in our old rhythm, the biggest gatherings come after the holidays and before spring planting, when the neighbors trade hands and the children carry water, and everyone eats from one long table. But the lard kettle is mine to tend. The seasoning is mine. The crocks that go down cellar are mine to fill and mine to watch. I have been minding that kettle so long that I can read it with my eyes half closed and my hands full. Now let me be honest with you before I tell you one pretty thing, because you deserve the plain truth first. Rendering fat does not make it last forever, and I would be lying to you if I said it did. When you melt this fat down clean and set it in a cool cellar, it will keep you weeks, and if your spot is truly cold and dark, a few months. The enemy is not really the little bugs that spoil raw meat. Once the fat is rendered and strained well, it is nearly all pure fat, with the water cooked out, and the bugs need water to grow. The real enemy is the air, the light, and the warmth working on the fat itself until it turns and goes rancid. So I will tell you the honest shelf life first, and only then the part you came for. A cool, dark, well-covered crock is what buys you your months. A warm, bright shelf steals them back. Now let me show you the 3 fats your butcher lets go. The very ones we have never once thrown away. The first is the leaf fat, and you will find it laid around the kidneys deep inside the animal. When you lift it up to the light, it hangs soft and thin, delicate as a lace curtain a girl might starch for the front window, and it renders down into the sweetest, cleanest lard of all, the kind I save back for pie crust. The second is the back fat, and it comes off firm along the top of the spine, a good thick ribbon you can stand on its edge, and it will hold. The third is the fat back proper, a solid, heavy slab of it, plain and honest. Now a butcher in town looks at these 3 and sees trim. He tosses them in a bin or sells them off for pennies because his trade is the cuts folks pay the most for, the chops and the roasts, and the fat only slows his knife. But my mother taught me, and her mother taught her, that the man who throws that fat away is throwing away a whole winter of cooking grease and paying store price to buy it back come January. We have never made that trade, and I don't want you making it either. Once you have your 3 fats set out on the table, the very next thing is the knife work, and this is where your patience pays you. You want to cut every bit of that fat down into small, even pieces, and the size I aim for is about a walnut, no bigger. There is a reason for it beyond neatness. Small pieces render faster and far more evenly, so the whole kettle gives up its fat together instead of some cubes melting away, while big chunks sit stubborn in the middle and start to scorch. Even pieces mean even heat, and even heat is the whole secret. Here is your tell, and it is one you can feel right in your hand. Work with the fat good and cold, straight up from the cellar, or set out in the cold morning air until it firms. Cold fat cubes clean. Your blade goes through it with a soft, sure resistance, and each piece falls away square and holds its shape on the board. If that fat has gone warm and soft, it smears and drags and slides under the knife, and you will fight it the whole way. So keep it cold, cut it walnut small, and you have done the one thing that makes all the kettle work that comes after go smooth and sweet. Now let me take you all the way down to the bottom of the kettle, where the whole long afternoon of the work gets done. Now let me take you all the way down to the bottom of the kettle, where the whole long afternoon of the work gets done. You have your fat cut small and even, and that heavy cast kettle set over the wood cook stove, the fire steady and low, never roaring. Before I put in a single handful of fat, I pour a splash of water in the bottom, just enough to wet the iron. That little bit of water keeps the first pieces from catching and browning before the fat begins to give up its own grease. It cooks away soon enough, and by then the fat is swimming in what it made itself. Then I let it be, low and patient, the kettle breathing like a slow sleeping cat by the warm stove. Now let me tell you why the watching matters more than anything else in this whole job. You do not walk away from a rendering kettle, not to hang wash, not to answer the door, not for a minute longer than it takes to feed the fire. Low, steady heat is the whole secret. If you let that fat climb too hot, it starts to smoke, and once it smokes, it scorches, and scorched fat turns bitter and dark, and there is no saving it. Overheated fat spoils the flavor. And worse, an unattended kettle of hot fat over live fire is a true danger, one of the surest ways a kitchen catches fire. So you sit near, you stir now and again with a long wooden paddle, and you keep that heat gentle. A batch will run you 1 to 3 hours, depending on how much fat you started with and how fine you cut it. The finer the pieces, the faster they give up their grease. There is no hurrying it past that. You cannot rush honest fat. Now let me teach you how to read the kettle, because it will tell you plain when it is finished if you know its signs. At first the little pieces float and bob and shrink, and the whole pot bubbles and mutters as the water cooks out of them. Then, one by one, those shrunken pieces turn golden and sink to the bottom, and those are your cracklings settling down. When the loud bubbling quiets to a soft, lazy simmer, you're close. Look at the fat itself, when it goes clear as spring water, pale gold and see-through, with a clean, mild smell, and no darkness, and no browning at the edges. Then it is done, and ready to come off the heat. Clear fat, quiet pot, sunk cracklings, and a smell like nothing but clean pork. That is your whole answer, given by look and smell and feel, no thermometer needed. Now here is where a body starts to understand what this free scrap is really worth. The old homesteading rule of thumb, and I flag it as an estimate, not gospel, is that you get back roughly 80 to 90% of the raw fat's weight as pure lard. The rest cooks off as water or stays behind as cracklings. So one big kettle of trimmings the butcher would have thrown in the slop can hand you a whole winter of cooking fat. Think on that against the store. Butter runs $4 to $6 a pound in most shops, and you fry and bake and grease your pans through the cold months on lard you paid nothing for. That is not a small saving. That is your baking fat for a season, sitting free in the bottom of your kettle. And it goes deeper than butter. If you were to buy lard back from the store, the very thing you're making, it runs anywhere from $2.84 up to $7.75 a pound, and dearer yet in some places. One hog gives you fat enough to render down pounds and pounds of it. Now do the plain arithmetic with me. You paid nothing for those trimmings. The butcher was going to discard them. Every clear golden pound you pour off is a pound you did not hand your grocery money for, and it adds up faster than you would think across a winter of cooking. That is the whole heart of why we have never wasted this cut. It is not thrift for thrift's sake. It is a full pantry bought with patience and a little firewood instead of dollars. So there it sits, your kettle of clear rendered fat, with the golden cracklings resting on the bottom, the afternoon's work done, and the smell of it clean and mild in the kitchen. Now let me carry the last of it, the straining and the cracklings and the keeping, to where your questions get answered. Now let me carry the last of it to where your own questions get answered, because the keeping is where a careless hand undoes a good day's work. Item 5 is the one I will not let you skip, for it is the safety step. While the fat is still hot and pourable, you strain it through a clean cloth laid over the mouth of your crock, and you catch every visible bit of meat and tissue. This is not tidiness. Those little solids are moist, and buried under the fat they sit in a low oxygen pocket, and that is the very place where Clostridium botulinum can take hold. Thorough straining is the real precaution, not an extra nicety. And hear me plain, do not store other foods sunk down inside your lard. No meat, no vegetables tucked under the fat for keeping, unless you're following a tested process. That old submerged method is exactly where the danger lives. Item 6 is the pouring and the keeping. Ladle the clarified lard into clean, dry crocks, wipe the rims, and seal it well against the air. Then set it somewhere cool and dark, the springhouse shelf or the root cellar, where it holds its sweetness for weeks and on into a few months. A cold pantry or a stone cellar is the traditional home for lard, and it asks nothing of you but shade and stillness. Item 7 is the cracklings, and they are a second food, never a scrap for the bucket. Once they are drained and salted, they are a butchering day treat, crisp and rich. I fold them into cornbread, so every bite carries a little crackle, or I fry them into lard cakes the way the Swiss families over in Indiana do on their butchering day. Nothing of the hog is lost. Now the honest limit, lard does not keep forever, and the thing that ends it is not usually bacteria but rancidity. When fat goes over, it tells on itself. A sharp smell, something like paint or a waxy crayon, and a bitter taste on the tongue. That means the fat has oxidized and you pour it out. Rancidity, not spoilage bugs, is your everyday measure, so trust your nose and your tongue, and I would truly like to hear from you. Tell me down in the comments which fat your own butcher throws out or sells for near nothing, and tell me what 1 pound of lard costs on your store shelf. I read them, and I learn from you as much as you learn from me. Here's where you go next. That very same butchering day gives us the pork scraps and the good broth, and next time I will show you how we cook them down into scrapple, that loaf you slice and fry crisp for a winter breakfast. It is the natural next step after today's lard, so let that be the next one you watch. Remember the plain rule of this kitchen. Render it low, strain it clean, keep it cool and dark, and use every last part. A plain life, a full pantry, and never once a good thing wasted.